All right, if you're keeping up, that means that you've read this week's stories, which are The Lottery by Shirley Jackson and The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, which would have been good Halloween stories. I should have thought out the schedule a little better. These stories are they're a little bit different than the other stories we read. The other stories were very involved with character and character psychology, leading to a climactic decision point, which we've been writing about. These two stories a little bit more about specific effect and a kind of a tone. Starting with The Lottery, I think The Lottery is a little bit different kind of story in terms of plot. In The Lottery, I think your climactic moment is pretty much the last sentence of the story. So there is no falling action, there is no resolution, we don't know what happens, really. And Tessie Hutchinson is not much of a protagonist in comparison to the other protagonists we've had. I can't say she's a good guy, she doesn't seem to oppose The Lottery. And I don't know anything Tessie thinks or feels in that entire story. Again, comparing to our other protagonists, all of the other protagonists have some kind of interior life where the author tells us their thoughts. Tessie, I don't know what she thinks. She's really just sort of a cardboard figure that moves around and eventually it's caught up in this lottery. So in the end of that, it comes down to what does Shirley Jackson want us to think? She's trying to make a point, and to make that point, she has written what I would call a realistic fantasy. Realistic in the way that people treat each other and the descriptions, but there's one single fantasy element, and that is that this town in New England somewhere is still doing this barbaric ritual. So The Lottery is more for effect and to make you think than maybe it is about observing character. Now, Telltale Heart's kind of the same thing. Edgar Allan Poe, this is the way he wrote stories. He's a very early short story theorist, which means at the time he wrote this, there weren't a lot of people writing short stories, and he bothered to come up with a short story theory. He said that a short story, to be officially a short story, has to achieve a single emotional effect, and every single sentence should be devoted to that effect. I think you'd have to say the effect for Telltale Heart is probably shock or terror or horror. And so even in the very first sentence, it begins that idea that you know that the narrator is going to murder the old man, and you don't really know why. The narrator's got a grudge against him for no reason. And it's horrible. It's horrible to watch him do what he does to the old man. But what would be even more horrible, and this is what Poe is getting at, is if he does it all for no reason at all, because because the narrator himself is insane and has assumed some kind of a problem between him and the old man when none really exists. In fact, the evidence in the story shows us the old man treats him very well. So this story, you have a narrator who you can't really trust that well. And the story does reach a climax, but again, I think it's a climax where in the last sentence, you're at the climax of the story, no falling action, no resolution. So a little bit different stories. In both cases, we're using these stories to explore the idea of theme. What is the author trying to get across? In both stories, the first thing is sort of this emotional reaction of horror or shock. But then beyond that, it's like to make you think either about society in The Lottery or maybe about feelings of guilt and sanity in Telltale Heart. Okay, that's it.